Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. I'm Hillary Gowans. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Krakauer, guest hosting again. Joining me today is Orphe Divounguy, chief economist for the Illinois Policy Institute. The housing market has been on absolute fire the last year, and Orphe will provide an in-depth look at the Illinois market and how it compares to the rest of the nation. Orphe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Melanie.
Well, it's great to have you. You and I know the housing market intimately. I bought a house last year, and I know you're constantly looking at the market. So could you please kick it off by breaking down the components of real estate and what's making buying a home so attractive right now?
Well, so whether or not buying a home is attractive right now, that's a whole other question. But let's put it this way. During the pandemic, many families were looking for more space, and the haves got in the market and went and looked for homes in the suburbs. And then a lot of families also got some government stimulus. We also had that helped shore up their finances. We also had a decline in interest rates that pushed mortgage rates as low as they had been in a long time. And so the housing market got a lot of fuel and really heated up. And so we had a surge in housing demand across the country. But there was a problem. There weren't enough units available for most people, right? And this is because for the last decade or so, right after the Great Recession, home building had been extremely sluggish. And so we found ourselves with a large nationwide shortfall in housing units. And of course, when demand increases and the supply isn't there, we end up with a massive increase in housing prices. And so that's pretty much what happened during the pandemic. In Illinois in particular, while housing prices increased by 20% across the country in the last year alone, housing values only increased by 14% in the Illinois and mostly Chicago metropolitan area.
It sounds like what you're saying is so people might be out looking and shopping for a home, and they're finding that there's not enough homes in Illinois to purchase, which is driving prices up. And so that's an issue that predates the pandemic, I believe.
That's right. So we had a shortage before the pandemic, but housing demand hadn't surged, wasn't as robust as it is now. And so what ends up happening is when you have a lot of people trying to buy homes and buying homes, but you don't have enough units on the market, inventories fell to an all-time low and prices went up. Now, what's interesting about that story is that housing prices in areas where Americans moved during the pandemic. So we saw a lot of interstate migration during the pandemic, and people moved to different markets. People moved where there were fewer government regulations. People moved where the cost of government was lower. In other words, they had lower taxes, but great services. They had great amenities. People moved to those places and they really stimulated the housing market in those areas and the labor markets. And so we saw those places seeing a massive employment recovery. They recovered much faster than most areas around the country. The problem with Illinois is that we didn't get any of that, right? We have a massive labor market hole to recover from. We're still missing roughly 200,000 jobs from before the pandemic. And housing demand was also more sluggish in Illinois when compared to other places, which is why housing prices did not increase as much. And the reason for that is because people leave Illinois, they don't come here, right? We've had even before the pandemic, we had an out-migration crisis that has lasted so far, I think we're in the 8th year, I believe, of a declining population problem. And so even though mortgage rates were really low and incomes increased and families were finances improved, housing demand in Illinois was not as robust as it was even in Indiana or Wisconsin or in many other states around the country.
So a lot of people say that one of the benefits of Illinois and Chicago is that you can still find relatively well-priced homes, especially compared to other large cities like LA or New York. But what makes Illinois an outlier?
It's this, it's this issue, right? So we don't have people coming in, right? And population growth is an important factor in forecasting housing demand, right? So if there's nobody looking for homes in Illinois, we're not going to see the kind of sales that we saw for realtors that we saw in other states, and we're not going to see housing prices appreciate, housing values appreciate as much. So that is really the problem in Illinois. And we know the reason, right? The reason is, people understand that the true cost of home ownership in Illinois is not just the price tag of a house. It's also, the highest property taxes in the nation, the highest overall tax burden in the nation. And I will say crumbling infrastructure, right? We don't have the infrastructure that would justify higher housing valuations. And most of that is due to budgetary gimmicks in our state house. It's due to our public employee retirement crisis. All right, our pension costs that are rising so much that the state is unable to invest in communities despite raising taxes almost on a yearly basis.
Talk to me a little bit about that issue. So the cost of home ownership when someone's, looking at buying a home, how in Illinois, the factors maybe are a little different.
Yes, of course. Before we had this decrease in the state and local tax deduction cap, right? We saw during the Trump administration, we saw a decrease in the state and local tax deductions, that capped it at $10,000. And so before that, it was very easy for state governments to raise taxes, and then people would take advantage of the tax advantages in the federal tax code to deduct their state and local tax liability from their federal income taxes. And so, you could have the highest property taxes in the nation. You could have the highest overall state and local tax burden. And people would take that on the chin, right? Because they could deduct a lot of that from their federal income tax liability. With that change, right, with the change that occurred where the cap was now $10,000, it's no longer okay for a state to tax as much, because what happens is people feel the pain of paying higher taxes. Their tax burden increases. And so as a result, we saw a surge in migration. Illinois' out-migration crisis increased during the Trump administration. And, last year, it was at an all-time high. It keeps accelerating. And during the pandemic, we saw people just going to places that were better, more affordable. They went to Texas, Arizona, Florida, places with no income tax, places with low overall tax burdens. And so, as long as you continue to, Springfield continues to raise taxes and does nothing to rein in kind of the cost drivers, like this pension crisis that Illinoisans are feeling right now, then we're going to continue to see more people moving abroad and settling down in other states. We're at a point where very few people want to live, and work in Illinois. They'd rather be in Indiana, where it's a lot cheaper, and you still have access to the Chicago market.
I think you have a stat maybe you can share that illustrates this really well, which is someone's mortgage and their property taxes might be worth as much or higher than their mortgage payment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When you add up, those costs, you realize quickly that Illinois is one of those states where your mortgage payments, your maintenance costs your property taxes just add up, and they're much higher in Illinois than they would be in other places as a share of home value, right? So even given the value of your home, you're paying a higher share in housing cost to live in Illinois than you would elsewhere, especially given that housing prices are not rising as much here. So we're seeing that it's causing a lot of pain for families. And so although housing prices may seem more affordable relative to places like New York and San Francisco or Los Angeles, the cost of owning a home in Illinois is much higher and completely not worth it for most buyers and investors.
There's just one other aspect of this that I want to get into, which is renters. So tell me about what it looks like if you are just renting a home instead of looking to purchase one.
Yes, yes. This is a problem, a really sad situation for renters, because as housing demand increases and housing prices rise, traditionally what we see is rents decrease. They don't increase. And the reason rents decrease is mostly, first, you have more people buying homes than choosing to buy it rather than renting. But at the same time, you end up with an increase in supply, right? So you have more units available on the market, coming on the market. And so rent prices ought to decrease. Now, unfortunately, because supply had been so sluggish for the past decade and is only starting to try to catch up to housing demand nationwide, rental costs have also increased across the country. And this is a serious issue because there's a lot of research that shows that when rents increase, homelessness also increases. You get to a point where you have a serious affordability crisis. You have people who can't purchase a home, and then at the same time, they can't stay in their rentals or are getting outbid by high-income renters. And so this is a serious issue that we're facing nationwide. In Illinois, the problem gets compounded by this problem that I highlighted, where because we have the second highest property taxes in the nation, and that property taxes continue to increase really rapidly every year, landlords who ultimately just pass on those costs to renters, right? We end up seeing rental costs increase even more in a place like Illinois because of the high property tax burden that is falling on citizens, on residents, and that's increasing rapidly every year. So this is a serious problem, right? We're seeing housing prices increase and pricing many families out of the market. But at the same time, we're seeing rents also increase really fast and unfortunately squeezing a lot of low-income families.
What do you think our listeners should know in terms of solutions to that major problem you just highlighted?
Well, we have to get out of the way of construction, first of all. I think that it's important to allow builders to build, right? We know that there's a massive problem when it comes to the compounding effects of regulations, right? Zoning laws and land use regulations that prevent builders to build. I mean, a recent study by the National Association of Home Builders shows that basically 24% of the average sales price of a single family home can be directly attributed to the cost of regulations. These regulations at a state and local level, especially at the local municipal level, are squeezing builders so much that they can't build starter homes anymore. And what they end up doing is they're building these expensive units that are pricing out many people from the market. So government needs to start by getting out of the way of building. That's the first recommendation. The second thing is, if we want Illinois to be a place where people want to live, own, and work and play, what we need to do is make Illinois more attractive than other states. And the way to do that is by reforming our broken pension system, because that will allow us to lower pension costs. And a lot of people, don't understand why that's so important. When 25 to 30% of your state budget goes to pensions, you're spending less on infrastructure, you're spending less on schools, you're spending less on amenities, you're spending less on assistance for low-income families, right? You're spending less on so many things that would actually make Illinois more attractive. But at the same time, because pension costs are rising, property taxes are also increasing. And so you're squeezing families on their property tax bills. And at the same time, you're not providing them with the amenities and the things that attract people to local housing markets. And so, of course, as a result, people choose not to live here. Even if they have a job in Chicago, it's so much more attractive to buy and live or even rent in Indiana, where, by the way, Indiana had robust housing construction relative to Illinois in the last 10 years, right? And so, they have a serious problem in the sense that housing demand is so high over there, and they're building units to meet that demand. Whereas in Illinois, we're not building enough. And at the same time, not many people want to come here. And so we're in a situation where in the region, we're not doing very well. And so if we want to see our housing markets kind of pick up again, and we want people to be able to afford homes, we need to build, but we also need to lower the tax burden for people who are looking out there, potential home buyers who are looking out there and might consider Illinois to come and live because of the lake, and the nice amenities that we have, in our state, the natural amenities that we have in our state. So again, recommendation number one: reform pension system to lower costs and improve government spending on the nice amenities that people care about when they buy a home, right? Like schools and local parks. But also, we must build. I cannot say that enough. We must build, because without building more units, especially starter homes, affordability will be a problem for low-income families at the low end. I also have to say that Illinois is one of the states that's one of the most unequal. And so even though you may have some people at the top that are okay with rising housing prices, a lot of people are at the bottom struggling, right? Struggling to make their mortgage payments, property tax payments, and everything that comes with owning a home in the state of Illinois.
Thank you so much for diving into that topic with us today, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. We will talk to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.